Welcome to the Awakened Goddess Show, your source for inspiration, wisdom, and personal discovery. The place to learn from a diverse mix of mentors, metaphysical experts, spiritual leaders, and best-selling authors from around the world. I'm your host, Angela Wilkinson. Join me as I explore the minds of my masterful guests while they share powerful insights and easy-to-use tools you can start using right away. Now, let's tap into the energy of the Awakened Goddess and be enlightened by today's guest. Nancy Rynes is a spiritual explorer making the path to a love-filled life clear for seekers the world over. Nancy is a leading voice for personalizing the wisdom of near-death experiences, developing our heart-centered intuition, and living a life of inspired creativity. She's a speaker, artist, and author of the books Awakening from the Light and Messages from Heaven. Known for her fun, lighthearted girl-next-door demeanor, Nancy teaches others how to live a more purposeful, joyful, and heaven-inspired life. Now let's welcome Nancy to the show. Hi, I'm your host, Angela Wilkinson, and welcome to this episode of the Awakened Goddess Show. Today I have Nancy joining me, and she's going to share her near-death experience and talk about the teachings that she agreed to share. And we're also going to talk about how divine love forms the structure of the universe. So welcome, Nancy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
So glad to be here.
Yeah. So I have to share with the audience that you were actually recommended by one of the viewers. So it was interesting because it was like about a year ago when she told me that she had heard about your work, or she had heard like one of your talks and was really blown away. So I tried finding you at that time, and for some reason things didn't line up. And then more recently, I found your information again. I looked you up, and there you were. So
all right.
Yeah, it must be like perfect timing.
I think it is the right time. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, for people that aren't familiar with your work, let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
And talk about. So you had a near-death experience, but I'm curious, what was happening in your life right before that happened?
Yeah. So that's actually the really important part of the story. So the actual NDE happened about 3.5 years ago. But before that, for most of my adult life, I was a scientist, a geologist mostly, but I did a lot of work with satellite stuff. So we did a lot of looking for potential mining areas, looking at environmental impact for certain things. So I did a lot of really kind of in-depth science stuff for most of my adult life. And along with that, when you go into the sciences, there's a lot of pressure really to kind of give up any sense that you had, before that there was anything other than, physical reality. Like if you can't, measure it, it doesn't exist. So, during that time especially my undergraduate program, I think I kind of just gave into that and became really an atheist. I go back and forth between severe atheism and, maybe there is something out there, but I don't see it, but I would never really dive into anything deeper than that. I was really a materialist. And I have to admit that, sometimes in my life, I wasn't really all that kind to people that believed in anything other than, material reality. Not necessarily to their faces, but in here.
Well, but you know what? I love that you say that out loud, because, how many times do we find ourselves not necessarily judging out loud, but inside?
Right.
And I would love to make sure that we come back to that later in the conversation. So if I forget, let's bring that back in.
Okay. Yeah. So I spent, about 20 or so years of my life really in that kind of atheist space, going back and forth a little bit, but really at the close of 2013, so right before my NDE, I was starting to feel really, I wouldn't say depressed. It's not, I wasn't that strongly, in a funk, but I was in a funk. I wasn't really happy. I wasn't unhappy, but I felt like something was off. Like I wasn't really living the way that I wanted to live. Some things just weren't clicking in my life. And I didn't know what was happening. I just felt like, I really thought that I started to get these feelings and dreams that something was going to change. And of course, I didn't believe in dreams as being
Mm.
prognosticators. So I thought, it doesn't mean
Yeah.
anything. My sisters, however, and one of my really good friends were like, whoa, those dreams are pretty incredible and we need to pay attention to them. And of course, I'm like, doesn't mean anything. So, that those dreams really happened in like early December of 2013, and they involve like butterflies and things transforming and, all this new and beautiful imagery,
Hmm.
but also imagery that in hindsight, I would say was transformational imagery.
Right.
And, I kind of gave my sister the benefit of the doubt at one point, and I said, well, maybe I'm going to get a new job. Because we want
Maybe.
to relate that sense of unhappiness really to something external, like, oh, it's just my job, or I don't have the boyfriend I like, or the relationship I want, or it's
Mhm.
always something out there. So I
Right.
thought, oh, I'll just maybe I'll just get a new job or something, and everything will be okay. And that's what all this is about. So I took about a week or so off between Christmas and New Year's that year of 2013, early 2014. And at that point, I was living in Colorado and in the Boulder, Denver area. And in the wintertime, Colorado can be unbelievably beautiful.
Mm.
70-degree days and warm sunshine. So it was a Friday that was the last Friday of my vacation time. And I took my bike out on just a little, kind of a little tooly ride through town, just tootling around. And I had put a backpack on because I was going to run some errands, which turned out to be a really good thing that I had the backpack on,
Hmm.
and just set out just on this, the roads that I always rode on. This wasn't a big deal. Colorado has beautiful bike lanes. It shouldn't have been a big deal, but about a half a mile from home, I entered, one of those wonky traffic circles that,
Yes.
all these towns have. Well, our town had put in a new traffic circle, but it was really tiny and tight. It was kind of probably a little bit too small for the intersection. And so I started in the bike lane on this traffic circle and kind of noticed, there was a car behind me that was respectably back. And then there were a couple of cars that were coming in from a road, the intersection from the right hand side, from my
Hmm.
right hand side. And they looked like they were slowing down. So I wasn't too worried, but I knew I had to keep traveling because the guy behind me otherwise might hit me if I just like all of a sudden stopped. So I kind of cautiously started going around the circle. And at the very last minute, as I was coming up, where that intersection came in from the right, I noticed that initial car, which actually was a big SUV, I think it was a Tahoe,
Mm.
a big Tahoe. Just it wasn't going to stop, and I could. It almost looked like it was accelerating, actually. And I did one of these holy, I'm going to bleep it out. I
Yeah.
had one of those moments, and I thought in that split second, this is it. I'm going to die. People don't come out of basically I was, going to be T-boned
Hmm.
by, a massive vehicle. And I just in that instant had that moment of clarity, like, this is it. Nobody comes out of these kind of accidents alive on a bike. It's just not going to happen. I tried, to push off this woman's vehicle with my hand, with my right hand. I was like, pushing it up, trying to do that. And somehow I would love to know how this happened. I ended up on her hood,
Mm.
looking in at her like, hi, looking at her through her windshield. I don't know how that happened. I have no, it's not that I didn't have any memory of it. It just happened so fast. Somehow I was up on top of her car, looking in at her. And I saw that she had her hands like this on the steering wheel. I don't know if you can see that. And she had her phone in her hands and she was texting. And she didn't see me. She was so busy looking at her phone that she didn't see me looking at her like I'm looking at you right now.
Yeah, you're on the top
I'm
of
like,
her car looking at her and she's texting.
so she didn't see me.
Wow.
She kept driving, and she kept driving actually for quite a long time. And at that point, I was losing my grip on the hood. I didn't have anything to hold on to. So I'm like doing one of these down the hood. And, I wasn't really aware of her making any change in motion. She was just like going around the traffic circle, like everything was fine. And I eventually ended up going down off the front of her, the hood of the SUV. And I thought at that moment, oh my God, this is it. I'm going to hit the ground. She's going to run over me. And as I kind of fell off the front of the vehicle and hit the ground with my left shoulder and my head. So I hit kind of this part first.
But you had a bike helmet.
I did have a helmet on. It broke the helmet like all the way across here. Yeah. But if I didn't have that helmet on, it would have been instant death. There was no way you could survive that. So
just highlighting the little teaching moments as we go along. Right. No texting while you're driving. Wear your helmet.
Yeah, and even when you don't think people are going that fast, this happened at, she was probably going 20 or 25 miles an hour, which it sort of sounds fast, but it's really not compared to how fast we drive in town.
Right.
So it wasn't high speed. And so I hit the ground, and at the moment my head and my shoulder hit the pavement, I noticed something really odd. And all this time seems kind of drawn out because that's what happens, when you're in that moment. It's like time all of a sudden doesn't exist, and everything is just really slow. So I noticed something really funky. And I noticed that my sense of consciousness, what we feel like we're in our head, was now split. And so this is not the NDE, by the way. This is just like an out-of-body precursor to what's going to come. But for a few minutes, while I was being dragged under her vehicle and before the paramedics came, I had this sense that there was a me that was in my body that had a very different level of consciousness than a me that was outside of my body. There was a me that was standing out in front of the accident, kind of watching it all happen. Mm-hmm. And that me was I had this feeling that I was standing with my hands down, low, kind of just in this Zen-like, pose. It was like watching everything. And I remember that part of my consciousness thinking, this is all very sad, but it's happening just the way it's supposed to be. And everything is going to be okay. And of course, the human level of my consciousness that was, at that point, she was dragging me under the vehicle because I got stuck on her car. That part of me was terrified. So there was a really interesting sense of, I call it dual consciousness. Other people call it bilocation. Mm-hmm. To me, it was really, it doesn't matter what the terminology is, but I had that sense of me and me in two places. And so finally, the me that was outside of my body saw that one of the bystanders who was in he was in a truck, I believe, a pickup truck. He saw what happened and saw that I was being dragged under her car. And so he drove around the traffic circle the wrong way to stop her. So finally she stopped. The paramedics were on their way, through all this. And finally, when the paramedics got there and when they started, they were trying to figure out what was wrong with me, that's when my pain level went through the roof and when both of my consciousnesses came back together. There's one little important kind of thing to note before that, though. I had, as I was waiting for the paramedics to come, I really wanted to get up and run away. So your first instinct is to just pop up and go. That's that, fight or flight. And I really wanted to flee. And a woman came up kind of out of nowhere, this beautiful blonde woman. And she came up and she said, "Hi, my name is Anne." And she said her last name, but I just can't remember it. And she said, I'm a trauma nurse. I'm going to, ask you to stay still. She put her hand kind of on my shoulder, which is interesting because this shoulder was the one that was broken, and it didn't hurt when she put her hand on my shoulder, which I, in hindsight, found that really interesting. Because after that, it was really painful, after I got into the ER. But anyway, she put her hand on my shoulders and she said, "Don't move. I'm here to help you. Help's on the way." And so she stayed with me for a little while until the paramedics came. And then she asked me if I wanted her to be in the ambulance as they took me to the ER. I said, "Yeah, I'd love it because my family lives quite a ways away and I'd like some company." And then she disappeared. I don't know what happened to her. She just kind of disappeared, and no one else really saw her at the scene except one of the police officers who interacted with her very briefly, but she wouldn't tell him her name at all. So he didn't know who she was. And
Curious.
Yeah. And then the district attorney's office was curious too because they needed witnesses. And they looked for her for 6 months. Every hospital in Colorado couldn't find her. We had no idea who she was, but in hindsight, we know now she saved me from being a quadriplegic.
Wow.
And I know I'm going to get choked up again because it's like really, it's amazing when this happens, she just, if it hadn't been for her, whoever she was, whether, some kind of angelic being or just a human who had a good heart, it doesn't matter. I could have easily, if I would have gotten up, my spine would have collapsed. It was so badly broken.
Yeah.
And so she really saved I'm standing. I have 2 legs that work. My hands work. Everything works. So, it's awesome.
And I just want to say, when I was reading your story and hearing about all of the people that came to your aid and hearing about Anne, I teared up too, because it's like the immediate compassion that people have and how people come together. And when there's a situation that when someone is truly in need, people will show up. It's like, it's amazing.
It is. Yeah, it is. So we get to the ER, and I'm going to cut a lot of this out because it's just, we don't have a lot of time, but they find out that I've got at least 9 vertebrae in my back and neck that are broken in multiple places. One of them in my lower back, which would be like where your back kind of does the curve. That one of those vertebrae was basically blown apart. There wasn't anything left of it really. And then I had my collarbone right here was broken, and 5 ribs in my sternum and my pelvis. But I was, so pretty badly broken up. But that my back was really in need of being stabilized. So they scheduled me for surgery a couple of days later. So the accident happened on a Friday. My surgery was on Monday. And so I laid around like flat on my back, for a couple of days, just kind of waiting for everything to happen. So Monday rolls around and they wheel me into the OR in the afternoon. And I just I was not in a good space.
I bet not.
Terrified because I'm an atheist. I have this terror that I'm going to die and it's going to be it. I had a horrible fear of death before all this because I thought there was nothing, it was just black and that was it after death. And so going into surgery, I was terrified that I was going to die. And I had this weird, it's still in my mind. It's just so funny now, but not funny then. They wheeled me into the OR. I was completely conscious. I wish they would have, you know, put
You're
me
like,
out,
knock me out.
knock me out. But I get to the doors of the OR and I'm on my back and I notice they're this beautiful bright light and there's this light coming out, beautiful white light coming out. And I thought, it looks like the pearly gates.
Speaking from a non or an atheist standpoint.
I'm like, oh my God, what's going to happen?
And now for a quick break. Did you know that we have an Awakened Goddess Show community on Facebook? It's a great place to connect with the guests and to get bonus content from the show. Come on over and join us. And while you're there, make sure to like our page on Facebook. Want to stay in the loop and find out about upcoming episodes? Visit our website at theawakenedgoddess.com and subscribe to the show. Now let's get back to where we left off.
So they get me in there and, I could see the OR staff, standing around waiting for me to be prepped. And the anesthesiologist hooked me up to general anesthetic. And they did it in my IV. So it wasn't like I got a mask on me. It was through the IV. And this was anesthetic that I had gotten, 3 or 4 times before at least. So it was kind of a known entity. Mm-hmm. We thought we knew how I would react. It turns out that for some odd reason, divine timing, I don't know. For some reason, this particular time, I basically went into cardiac arrest. My heart stopped, my breathing stopped, everything kind of tanked. I didn't know that, mm-hmm. but that's what happened at that particular moment.
Yeah, you were having a whole different experience.
I'm like, I just kind of woke up and I thought, wow, this is pretty amazing. I was up on this hilltop with, I swear, some of the most beautiful scenery around me that I've ever seen. And it was not just physical, like beauty that I would see with my eyes. There was a peace and a love. And I mean, basically unconditional love on a scale that I couldn't imagine as a human being. But I could feel it coming through me as if it were like heat waves, like heat, how sometimes you feel like if you stand in front of a fire, heat kind of radiates into you. Mm-hmm. That's what this felt like, except it went all through me. This love was so peaceful and all encompassing. I started crying. And I'm standing on this hillside. I'm in a meadow. There are trees kind of off in the distance with low hills, low mountains in the distance with mist. And I thought, well, this is a pretty cool place to spend surgery.
You're like, wow, how'd they do that?
Because surgery, typically when you go under, if some of your viewers haven't gone under in general anesthesia, it's basically just gray. You go into not even sleep. You don't even dream. It's just gray, nothingness. So I was really surprised at first to see stuff, but I was even more surprised to feel that love. And then I had this moment of, I'm like looking around like this. I wonder if I died, because this isn't right.
You're like, where am I?
This isn't like what I remember from surgery. And so I had that thought of, I wonder if I died. And then another thought came in, but I don't believe in any of this. How come I'm here? I thought, my Roman Catholic upbringing kicked in. I thought, well, I should be in hell right now if they were right, And I had that thought of, why am I here? I didn't believe in any of this. Mm-hmm. And there was an answer which shocked me. And the answer was kind of this booming, welcoming voice, but it was in here that I heard it. It wasn't like with these ears, it was in here. And this voice was it was gender neutral, but it was powerful. And it said, "You're my child. This is your home. Welcome home." And I kind of lost it.
I bet.
Oh my God, and I realized in that moment that I had died. I knew it was absolutely clear that my body had died on the operating table somehow, some way, and I was in the afterlife,
Mhm.
whatever that is. And I sat with that for an unknown amount of time, just kind of weeping and feeling that love and peace. And then I noticed, kind of off from behind me, a woman, what looked like a woman, walked up and she's kind of embraced me with this beautiful love, like a hug of love, I call it. She just embraced me with her own sense of love. And I looked at her and I couldn't see her face. It was weird. The whole time I was with her, it was like a fuzzy face. But I could see that she had longish hair and she had this beautiful robe on, a robe maybe, or a skirt and a blouse or something that was pearly gray that kind of glowed. It was very glowy. And she said that she was my guide and she was going to take me through this place so that I could learn what I needed to learn in order to go back to my life. I'm like, I don't want to go back to my life now.
You're like, this is
I
so
stay
pretty
here.
here.
I don't
Well,
want to go back there.
so let me ask you,
Sure.
um, so you clearly didn't feel pain in your body, but
No.
did you have a sense of your body, or did you feel like you were kind of just energy?
I had a vague sense of a body, but not like as solid and real as, we feel right here. I didn't really
Hmm.
even have a sense that my feet were on ground. I had a sense sort of that I had height and that there was some substance to me. And I felt like I had I would call it like an etheric body in
Sure.
hindsight. At that time, I didn't know what to call it, but like a very fuzzy, gauzy kind of body,
Hmm.
but not really a sense of clothing, really, per se, just that I was there and I had just vague body parts, like light legs, arms, but
Right.
but it wasn't solid.
Right. Not dense,
No,
like we
right.
are here.
Kind of, I would say like halfway in between, really,
Mm.
what we are here and what we are when we cross back over to home, when we're back to pure energy. So it's
Hmm.
kind of in that in between state. And she was really just taking form for me. I could tell she wasn't human. She
Hmm.
was really an energy being. I could tell even then that she was just kind of holding a shape together for me so that I wouldn't freak out and, like close down and get all, scared.
Yeah.
So she walked with me for, if I were to put it into terms today, as much distance as we traveled and as much as I learned, it felt like I would have to be there 2 or 3 months in order to be able to experience all that. Now, for
Hmm.
me, it didn't feel like time passed at all.
Right.
There was no sense of a sunrise or a sunset. There was a sense of walking through different landscapes and seeing different things, but not really, the cycle of a day that we have
Hmm.
here. But for as much as I did, if I were to put that into my life here, it would be like 2 or 3 months of time. So yeah, sometimes that helps people understand that this was not a mere like, hi, how you doing, God? And then you go back into your body. I was actually there for a long time, kind of against my will.
By that point, you didn't know if you wanted to go back or
Right.
where you wanted to be.
Well, actually, I knew that I wanted to keep going, to go to the final place. I knew she told me that I wasn't really in the final state of heaven or the afterlife, that I was in my book I call it heaven's green room or a waiting room.
Yeah.
It's she kind of explained it as a place where when we first release our bodies, we have an amount of time, and I say time with kind of these air quotes because there really isn't any time there, but we have to kind of let go of the
Mhm.
human self and get used to where we are now and what's going to come. And we walk through our life review if we're going to have one, and kind of make peace and learn from what we just experienced on earth.
Mhm.
And that's where I was in that in between stage. But I knew that I wanted to keep going, and I wanted to go to the final heaven or the afterlife, because I didn't want to go back here to earth.
Well, because you knew what was here. You knew your
Yeah,
body was just demolished.
it was. And I was terrified that the next, year or so I'd be in just excruciating pain, that I'd never walk again. You have all those fears of, things are just going to just fall apart, because of this accident that happened. So I didn't want to come back, even though I had a daughter here who I loved, and my friends and my family. It was so amazing there, and I had no pain, and I was loved
Mm.
beyond. You can't put it into words how much love there is there, but also that there was a sense of connection to everyone and everything that was very tangible there. So I could feel and see connections to everyone and everything. And when I say everyone, I mean like everyone. There were, besides her name is Mary, I know now. And I didn't put it in the book, but I've found out that her name is Mary. And don't read too much into that. She's just a Mary.
There's a lot of Marys out there.
Exactly right. And that's what she said, trust me, there are millions of women that have been named Mary. So I had a sense too that there were maybe 1,000 or 2,000 other beings kind of off behind me that weren't interacting with me directly. She was their kind of their communicator or their translator, really,
Mm.
because her in her mind there were too many of them that wanted to speak to me, that it would have overwhelmed me. So they funneled all the communication through one, which is interesting that I kind of say that, but there isn't really a difference. Everybody is so intimately connected, and there isn't necessarily a big difference between one person and another. So if one of them in the background thought something,
Mm-hmm.
she got that thought and passed it on to me without
Mm.
any words being spoken through the vocal cords.
Oh, how beautiful.
And it was incredible. And I could feel their feelings. I could feel their love. There was a sense of individuality. At the same time, there was a sense of, this interconnection of everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you what, that's addictive, when you're there.
I was gonna say, I imagine coming back and after, you know, uh, coming out of surgery and back into your life, how separate, like that contrast of how separate and
Right.
individual we are all, and the weight of your body. I imagine that was such a maybe a difficult transition to go back to.
There were a lot of things that were difficult to transition back into. That first was that for me it was a sense of loss. It wasn't true loss. I found out later, but there was a sense of loss of that deep connection to Mary and to God or the divine and all those other beings who were with me.
Hmm.
I all of a sudden felt cut off and alone and almost abandoned.
Yeah,
Not
like
intentionally, but
yeah, like how come I can't stay?
right.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I really wanted to stay. I've put up a good fight.
You're probably listing off all the reasons why.
And at one point I remember throwing a temper tantrum, and that's really the only phrase I can use to describe it. It was a full-blown like 2-year-old's temper tantrum. And I'm not proud of that, but that's what a lot of us do when
Yeah.
we're given that it's not, for me it wasn't necessarily a choice. It was a choice and it wasn't a choice. And I say that because I had agreed to go back before I was even born into my life.
Hmm.
So I had signed up for all this stuff. And when Mary told me that, I'm like, hey, I don't remember that part of it.
Okay, so clarification. Did you sign up for the near-death experience, or was the near-death experience required to get you back on path?
It was, from what I could tell, the NDE was part of the contract.
Mm, okay.
But I'll
Wow.
couch it in these terms. There were so it was sort of that way. So I had agreed to 3 different points in my life where I could start to do this work that I'm doing now. And I
Mm,
passed by the first 2.
yeah.
So the third one was the big one. And that was really the big wake up call. So I had agreed that if I, let go number 1 and number 2, which were 2 different points in my life that I distinctly remember having made this choice to continue on the atheist path.
Mm-hmm.
If I hit number 3, then number 3 was going to be the doozy.
Yeah.
And that was what I had agreed to, if I had gone through this, then I would go back and do this work.
Okay, so this is another great moment to pause and say for
Yeah.
anybody that's watching and listening, if you're getting those messages that you need to shift paths, then maybe you want to listen, because we don't want you to have a 2x4 or Mack truck experience.
Right. Yeah, really. I had 2 really good opportunities to shift, and I just blew them off. And yeah, pay attention to that stuff. That, especially if you get that knowing or feeling, deep feeling in your heart that, wow, I have a choice to make here, and I could go 1 or 2 directions, or maybe one of 3 directions, or whatever.
Hmm.
Pay attention to what your heart is telling you, because that's where God and your guides and the angelic beings talk to you. That's how they impact you, and your higher self too. It's kind of the big connector. It's the radio that you get back and forth to the afterlife, to God and all those spiritual beings. It comes right in here.
Mm,
So pay attention to that stuff. It's really
yeah,
important.
yeah. Okay, so you were continuing with your story. So what was it? Okay, so you were still with Mary,
Right.
and you were experiencing the communication and all of the different essences of all of the
Wow.
beings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
I
what
guess.
happened?
Well, yeah. She walked with me for a long, long time, and we went to this beautiful pond up in the mountains. I mean, we went to a bunch of different places, but for some reason I want to talk about this. I don't know why, so I will.
Yeah.
But we went up to this beautiful pond up in the mountains, and it was like black water, really dark water.
Huh.
It wasn't a really big pond, but it was really dark water. And she asked me to kneel down next to the pond and touch the surface and see what happened. And I'm like, kind of copped an attitude a little bit. I'm like, I know what happens when you touch the surface of the water. And she's like, just do it anyway. So
You're like, what kind of games are you playing with
I
me?
know, right? Yeah, like I know what's going to happen. There's going to be ripples along the surface, right? So yes, there were ripples along the surface, but superimposed on those ripples, so I'd see these ripples flowing away from where I touched the water. Kind of behind that, I could also see all the different choices I made in my life.
Wow.
And it was very clear to me. It just got that knowing with her that, when I touched that surface of the pond, that was a choice that I made. And I got to see how those choices that I made impacted other people. And the crazy thing was, I didn't just see it from outside, like from my perspective. She also allowed me, all at the same time. I mean, this is like the best special effects ever. She she showed me how my decisions and my actions affected someone else from their viewpoint, looking back at me.
Mm,
And I got to feel their feelings and see what they saw and experience what they experienced from their perspective interacting with me. And some of those were good, and some of those were not so good. But I got a chance to see intimately how choice affects everything around us. And not just physically either, not just, if I say something uplifting to you, you might go away feeling good.
Hmm.
It's at that level, but it's also at a deeper spiritual level that whatever I say or do sends out an energy vibration of
Right.
positive or negative, and it also affects everything around me.
I'm glad you're enjoying today's episode of the Awakened Goddess Show. I want to take just a moment to thank all of the listeners and viewers who've donated to the show, because the Awakened Goddess Show is community supported. That means it's 100% donation based. So if the show has been meaningful for you, it's inspired you, or has been helpful in any way, I ask you to support the show. All donations go towards producing the show, keeping it on the air, as well as keeping the archives available free anywhere in the world. So thank you for your contribution and everything you're doing to support the Awakened Goddess Show. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. You can go to theawakenedgoddess.com/donate to show your support. And if you're not able to donate financially today, there are many ways you can support the show. You can share the show with your community, subscribe, and leave the show a 5-star review on iTunes. Because without your help, the show wouldn't be possible. Now let's pick up where we left off. Back to the show.
So it isn't just material stuff. It's really a vibration that we send out. And that was a huge wake-up call for me. Like, wow, now I got to be really careful about what I say and do. And even, I know this bothers some people, but even what I think, because those thoughts are also energy patterns. They can be spiritual energy patterns. Your feelings can be too. So while I try not to drag people down with, watch your thoughts. It's kind of an advanced topic to watch your thoughts, because thoughts really, I think it was Mike Dooley that said thoughts become things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was him. But they really do. They become an energy wave, of spiritual energy wave, if nothing else, that kind of goes out.
Well, that's how you can psychically attack people, is
Right.
with your thoughts, and you projecting these negative thoughts towards someone. And it has a negative impact on them.
Right. Yeah. And I can feel it now. And when that kind of stuff happens to me, very rarely, but I can feel it.
Yeah.
As a tangible, I can feel it actually mostly coming in my back is where I tend to feel it, but I feel it. So yeah, be careful about that stuff. It's, and I'm cautious about it now. I'm very aware of how I interact with others and what I'm feeling and thinking. It's not 100%, we're humans, we mess up. It's okay. But, I try to do the best I can.
Well, and that goes back to the judgment piece that we were talking about earlier, is that whether we're judging externally, judging people outside of ourselves, we're doing it out loud, inside, or we're even projecting judgment on ourselves, it all has an impact.
Yeah. That judgment is a very negative thing. Mm-hmm. In fact, I was surprised when I was getting my life review. That moment at the pond was partially a life review. You hear about some NDEers talk about that, and I didn't realize that's what it was at the time, but that's what it really was kind of a mini life review. And that I was surprised that I wasn't judged by Mary or the Creator, God, Divine, for what I had done, some of the bad things I had done. And it wasn't like I committed murder or something, but even just hurting someone's feelings intentionally, that I wasn't judged for that. Now I will say, I have a caveat in there. While we're not judged from external, God doesn't judge us for that. I can tell you what, when you're standing there in front of God and all creation, and you're looking at your actions, you're kind of at least for me, I was somewhat horrified at what I had done. And you don't need external judgment. I can
No.
tell you that right there. It's like an instant wake up call, like, oh boy, now I get it. But also remember this too, that when we, as Mary told me later, when we do, especially intentionally, kind of bad stuff, our some of our ministers might tell us we're going to go to hell. That's not necessarily true.
Hmm.
What's going to potentially happen is we have to make amends for those things. Some people call it karma.
Hmm.
Mary liked to call it, well, you got to make up for it. You got to make amends for some of those things that you've done in the past. And that could be coming back into a life. That could be making amends on the spiritual level, on the spiritual plane. So at some point, you kind of have to pay back if you've done
Sure.
some things that are kind of dicey. And you're, at least for me, I was totally on board with doing that because I knew, yeah, I feel like I want to make up for some of these things because
Hmm.
they weren't all that great. So while the judgment doesn't come in from outside, oftentimes we'll feel it ourselves. And again, it shouldn't be a negative thing.
Hmm.
It's okay. We mess up. Learn from it, move
Right.
on, forgive yourself, forgive others. And yeah, if you have to make amends, make amends, but don't beat yourself up.
Yeah, try to be proactive about that one.
Right. Much better to do that.
Yeah. So then what was your experience like after? Like, because in the book you said you were terrified to make the change to come back and share what you received, like your
Right.
path. So let's talk about that. What was that like?
Yeah, I had a struggle for several months, and the struggle kind of went off and on maybe for another year actually. But the first 3 months after I came back, besides having to heal, which I
Hmm.
healed very quickly, unbelievably quickly.
Well,
It
yeah, 1 second. I want to back up because before you came back, she touched you in a few places,
right.
and I'm wondering, what was the effect of that?
Well, yeah, she did what I could call like almost Reiki. Now, she touched me here, and this is kind of up in here was where my sternum was broken at the very top. It was cracked, and then she touched my rib cage off on the left side, and I didn't feel anything at that moment when she did that. But when I came back into my body, I noticed I didn't have any pain there anymore. And if anybody's ever broken ribs, everybody was shocked that I didn't feel pain. And broken ribs apparently are really painful.
I
And they
imagine.
were they were before my surgery. So while I was laying in bed in the hospital room waiting for surgery, I was in horrible pain all
Mm.
over. But after surgery, there was no pain here. There was no pain here. I had no pain in my side, and I had very little pain in my back, which the doctor started, my surgeon, actually, it wasn't my surgeon, it was my trauma doctor, finally started calling, what he started calling me tough as nails and Iron
Mm.
Lady. Because I, like 2 days after surgery, I said, can you please take me off this opiate? Because I don't need pain meds anymore. He's like, yeah, you do. I said, no, I actually don't. Take me off this stuff. And he had that kind of like wide-eyed, holy cow. And I said, I'm not taking them anymore. So I did take Tylenol for the first couple of days after I went off the opiates, but that was about it. Just like a half dose Tylenol for a few days.
Wow.
And everybody in the on the ward was like, it's not supposed to happen. And I was up walking around with basically no pain meds in me, with,
Wow.
broken bones in my all over the place. And interestingly enough, they had a body cast on, so I had a neck brace, a neck collar, and then a removable, like a really stiff plastic body cast that I wore
Mm.
after surgery to stabilize because I still had a ton of broken bones in my back. So they put me in a body cast to stabilize all that stuff. And they said, well, expect to be in that for at least 3 months, maybe up to 4 months. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, at least I can get up and walk around. And then 5 weeks after surgery, all that stuff came off. They said,
Wow.
"You're good to go. We don't know how, but you're good to go." I'm like,
Mm.
whoa, that's awesome.
Wow. So,
So,
yeah, then
I,
emotionally, what was the, because that I
whoa,
can't even imagine.
yeah, it was one of those obviously overnight conversions from complete atheism to complete believer. And I didn't have a reference point for that.
Hmm.
I didn't know what it was that I had just experienced. I knew that it was pretty profound. And I knew that I had had some kind of an audience with the divine master, or whatever you want to call God, spirit. And I knew that I had had a really deep connection to my spiritual guide, Mary, and many other beings. And like I said before, I felt cut off from all of that as soon as I came back. But I was really struggling with, you know, just a couple of days ago, I was an atheist and a scientist. And there was nothing in my science training that prepared me for what happened. Nothing.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? Who am I going to tell? I thought my friends are going to think I'm totally crazy.
Hmm.
I'm going to lose everybody that I ever cared about because they're going to think I'm nuts. And I struggled with that for a long time, trying to decide, do I tell anybody? Now, I did tell the chaplain in the hospital,
Hmm.
and she explained what had happened to me and that it was real, which was awesome that she did that, because not all chaplains will do that. But, she at least validated what I had experienced.
Sure.
So then the next step was, well, do I tell my friends and my family? And I told my sisters, and they were cool with it. And so little by little, I started telling people, but I ran up against a wall when it was telling my wider audience of friends,
Sure.
or, my Facebook pals and that kind of thing. So I kind of held off on that for a while. And then I had my first moment of release was, you know what? I'm just going to go with it because I'm miserable trying to keep it in. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I just couldn't do it.
Right.
There was that need to say, hey guys, this is what happened to me. And if you decide to check out of my life, okay.
Right.
I'll, wish you well, and off you go. But that really didn't happen, interestingly enough. It was fairly well accepted. Now, I did have some scientist acquaintances that sort of backed away,
Sure.
and that's to be expected.
Hmm.
But for the most part, everybody that was in my life before is still in now. But I went through a series of struggles where, okay, that was the first step. I told people, I'm done now, right? And I thought,
You're like, glad to get that over with.
it's out there. I'm done. And then, 3 months after that, I had this feeling like, no, I'm not done yet. And then I got this feeling I needed to write a blog. And then, of course, I went into fear like, oh my God, that's like putting it in words out there for everybody and their mother to read. And then finally I said, all right, well, I'm miserable trying to hold this in. I'm going to go with it. And started writing a blog. And then that kind of went through the same process. That felt okay for a while. And then, no, I needed to go another step further. And that's when I started writing a book about it. And each one of those steps helped me um, really connect, I think, with a different group of people and learn, I think, the different ways that I can help people and
Hmm.
connect with people just in slightly different ways. I'm not going to say it didn't help me really polish my story, because my story was polished right away. As soon as I came back
Yeah.
into my life, I started writing about it in the hospital as much as I could. Now, I couldn't write for very long periods, but like Eben Alexander, I started writing about it as soon as I could because I didn't want to lose it. I was afraid that I would lose all those memories. Um, but just the act of writing a book kind of helped me conceptualize how I would talk about it to a wider audience. And so that's kind of how it all started to roll. And I noticed something really interesting is when we're on our right path, when we're on the path that we're supposed to be on, everything feels right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When we try to block that, at least for me, when I try to block it, I feel like really anxious. I get to feel anxious and, okay, I know I'm not doing something right. I know I'm not doing what I feel like I should be, even though that seems like it might be a little scary. I'm going to go with it because I know it's going to make me feel right in here.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I know when I'm doing something that's right on my path. I go in here and feel, yeah, that feels right. Yeah, it's scary up here, but it feels right in here. So I'm going to go with this.
Let the heart lead you.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the big messages from Mary was the heart is your divine guidance right there.
Wow.
It's right there, easy to get to, sometimes also easy to ignore.
Yeah. Yeah, until it's like once you feel it and you follow it once or twice, it does get easier and stronger, I find.
Right.
So.
Right. It does.
Yeah. So we should have tapped into the etheric realm before we started this conversation to expand time, but since we didn't,
I know.
Are there any in the last minute or so, is there any thing that you feel really called to share about people that are watching, listening, maybe that they need to hear?
The one thing that comes to mind is that peace is real. This is all about peace now. That sense of peace that I had during my time in heaven, while we can't exactly recreate that here on earth, we can begin to achieve it and we can begin to create it. And you got some really great viewers out there that probably know this, but peace really starts within each one of us. We really shouldn't expect that peace will come in from the outside. It's granted it did for me when I was in my near-death experience, but for us here in this realm, we can create peace for ourselves and our families from in here. And that's the first step to creating, a broader world peace too, which is, I know it's on my mind a lot lately, mm-hmm. but I can't affect that as much as I can affect me. And so that's what I do is I work on me first, achieving peace and love in my own life. And then hopefully that will translate out into the world.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Nancy, this was an amazing conversation. And thank you for taking us on this journey with you. And thank you for sharing your experience. And I'm so glad that you didn't just stuff it all in and squelch it and hide, and that you are sharing it. So thank you so much for joining me today. This was awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Have you created vision boards, listened to meditations, and read books on how the law of attraction works, yet you're still not where you want to be? The key to manifesting is focusing your attention on your big dreams consistently, fully embodying the feeling as if it's already happening. And you may already know this, but it can really be tough to do alone. And that's why I created the Envision Experience, a revolutionary and simple 28-day process for powerful quantum-level dream manifesting. Over 4 weeks, you'll get laser-focused guidance, accountability, support, plus a powerful personalized movie to help you envision and embody your dreams into reality. So if this sounds interesting to you, I'd love for you to join us. You can find out more at theawakenedgoddess.com/envision-experience. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Awakened Goddess Show. I hope you enjoyed today's guest and got something you can start using in your life right away. For more spiritual insights and to listen to more episodes, subscribe to The Awakened Goddess Show at theawakenedgoddess.com and discover wisdom that'll change your life.